Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Good late afternoon, early evening for us out here in the East Coast of the United States. Good, whatever you are, wherever you are. How are you? Danny Dhaiphong here. Another Left Lens live stream. As you're coming in, of course, you know the drill, the ways to support this channel, and the ways to support this particular stream and video, and all videos really, is to like this stream when I'm live. So like it now. Make sure you like it. If you don't get to after when it's posted, make sure you like all the videos on the channel, of course. Liking helps boost the algorithm because we have some algorithm issues here on YouTube, especially for us leftists, especially for us communists, our socialists. We tend to get suppressed in the algorithm. So please do like the stream. The next way you can help this channel out is if you're new, subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications bell. Make sure you do both so you know when I'm live and you get updates in your feed on the content that I put up. I put up streams and I make sure to clip these streams for you for some more digestible watching and listening. And then, of course, probably the most important way to support this work and this channel to make sure that I'm able to go at the pace I'm going. I've actually been increasing the number of streams, increasing the number of videos published. I have gotten a little bit of a boost by doing that, and I want this channel to continue to grow. So please do also make sure you are subscribing on Patreon. That's the way you become a quote unquote member or someone who just sustains this work. It's patreon.com/Danny Dhaiphong. I've reached my goal for now, but what ends up happening is people cancel their subscriptions at the end of the month. So I'm still trying to get to around 500 subscribers so I stay above the $3,000 per month mark. That is my annual goal, and I'm not too far from that. I'm about 25 subscribers. So please do subscribe there. To help keep sustaining this work. And yeah, that's how you can support this work. So thank you all for coming. I'm just going to say hello to the folks who have been able to come early. Hello, Anna. How are you? Neocons high on their own farts, want others to inhale their farts with them. Mainstream media says that's fine. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Alex, hello, hello. Got your coffee or tea brewing. Lewis, hello. So what's wrong with passing the euro? Well, we're going to get into that a bit. What's wrong? What's not so wrong? All the contradictions we're going to talk about. Carl's, hello. How are you? Means he says, or she says, they say, means U.S. economy is worse than the U.S. and the U.S. is causing it. That's a good explanation. Petamilo, hi. Greetings, Felix. Greetings, Bovis. Greetings again, Big Teal. Thanks for coming. Greetings, David. Greetings, Darnell. Hello to all of you. Greetings, Intoniac1234. I wonder if someone close to Biden family released that data on 4chan. Interesting. And then hello, Joshua. Hello. So people are going to keep coming in, and I'm just going to give you an outline of how I want this to go. Generally don't come on at this time on Tuesdays, so this is kind of special. I do plan on coming on probably again tomorrow, see how that goes, and then probably not again until maybe Saturday early evening. I got some things I got to do. But how I want this to go is, one, I'm going to talk about the euro. That breaking news. It's pretty incredible news. It's big. I mean, it's pretty big news. It's significant because it means that the United States' plan in some regard with its actions toward Russia and this larger new Cold War is working, and this proxy war with Ukraine is working to a degree. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about Biden's latest New York Times poll, which shows that he is even more unpopular than he was. This wasn't even a month since we've covered this topic. And so we're going to look at that poll, and we're going to take a look at why this is happening. I mean, it's it's staggering. It's pretty staggering to watch the decline of the American empire in real time. And at the end, it depends on the timing. I wanted to cover the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act if there's time. And if there isn't, I do have a new article out on Substack. I have not yet boosted because I've been doing other things, preparing for this stream, getting the articles together, and promoting it, all of that. We may review that so I can boost it a bit, boost my Substack, show you what I wrote. I'm going to be doing something called Ghost Stories of Capitalism on Substack. I was thinking, what's a good way of talking about my personal history, what I have experienced that led me to this place? What's a good way to do that in this moment where it seems like there's so many people questioning capitalism, questioning the establishment? And I want my writing to be a bit different right now, right? I'm feeling that right now. And that there's been a lot that's happened that while I hold it internally, right, I don't generally talk about it that much. So my latest article in Substack talks about what it was like to work within a social service agency, within a human service agency that literally closed its doors because of austerity, and what it was like to be on a homeless outreach team while there, and also being a shop steward of the union there. And so the first Ghost Stories of Capitalism in this series is called When the Doors of Us, Watching the Shutters of Austerity Close. And I just talk about that experience. So it's a little bit different for me. It's still analytical. It's still very much about understanding capitalism, understanding imperialism, but with a bit of a personal touch. And I've been kind of inspired to do that more now that I feel like we are in this watershed moment where it's important that our work, what we do, is as transparent as possible so people know why we take the positions that we do. I think that that's the kind of the core of any kind of organizing or political education, or both, is that if we can't show that, then how can people really trust us, especially if we start to shift things up, why we go in certain directions, why we start to focus on certain things over others, because we're always making choices and negotiating. We're always negotiating. Well, what do we focus on? What do we pay? Are we just doing it because of the algorithm? Are we just doing it because everyone else is talking about it? Or are we doing it because there's a broader and bigger purpose, one that's bigger than ourselves? And so that's what I'm hoping to accomplish with this series, I'm calling it. This is the first one. Maybe I'll do multiple. We'll see. I mean, things happen. Sometimes I do have to make sure I'm on the quote unquote beat, talking about what's happening right now, right here. But I hope that this is part of my work. So we may review that if there's less time. More time, we could get into the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. I have a lot of people who are asking me about talking about Hong Kong, talking about Xinjiang, and I want to do that. So I did have that planned, kind of, sort of. I do have materials, but if we can't get to it because I do have to be off before 6 p.m., probably a good period before 6 p.m., at least 15 minutes before, then we may have to just review the article. But I do definitely want to promote it. So before we do that, though, let's get into the first story. And guys, be sure you're still liking the stream. Make sure you're boosting this. We're about 18 likes, it looks like, short. I'm just gonna refresh here and see. Yeah, we're about 18 likes short of the viewership right now, and getting it closer to the number, to evening that out will help actually get more viewers on here. So please do that if you can. But let's get to the first story, and we're gonna talk about the dollar. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the dollar on here. Had Michael Hudson on, had Richard Wolff on. We've been talking. We talked about the dollar with respect to Pepe Escobar. We've had a lot of guests on here talk about the dollar. Okay, And there's a debate, right, about decline versus strengthening it. And I'm somewhere in the middle. I agree with Michael Hudson that the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the way that the United States has handled it, has definitely artificially boosted the dollar through mechanisms that I'm going to talk about as we talk about the decline of the euro. But a lot of it is targeted at Europe, weakening Europe so that the dollar actually receives a boost. And that's definitely has happened. And on the other hand, I do think that the dollar is in a relatively weak position, not because it's not the dominant, the principal foreign exchange currency, not because its value has plummeted, so to speak, but that the terrorism of the dollar, the economic exploitation involved in dollar imperialism is showing real cracks. And those cracks are important because they point to what I also agree with Michael Hudson and others point to a phenomenon where all countries who are resisting imperialism at any level want to, if not de-dollarize, diversify their currencies so that they are not completely dependent on the United States' dollar. Because what does the United States' dollar bring? It brings austerity. It brings the looting of the economy. It brings just unequal exchange, debt, et cetera, et cetera. And we see a trend where Iran, Argentina are joining BRICS. We see Russia figuring out a new Eurasian monetary system. We know China has also been at the forefront of digitizing its currency and even is in discussion with Saudi Arabia to trade in yuan, a petro yuan for oil, right? All of this is happening because of the consequences that dollar imperialism has for the world. And I think that actually is not a position of strength necessarily for the dollar, that it is of weakness, that it is at its kind of crescendo, that the horizon is near, if not here. And what is beyond the horizon is yet to be made. But we know that we are kind of at the end of the empire. The 21st century will be the end of the American empire, which means it will be the end of dollar domination. So what comes afterward is the question. Well, first we have to talk about what is here. And what is here and what is happening in the here and now is that the United States is doing everything it can to plummet Europe into an economic crisis and collapse using the Ukraine crisis as an excuse. And this has been an objective since day one for the United States. It is an objective that the United States has had for quite some time now, where Russia and China and Europe have all become much more integrated than ever before. And the United States has wanted to undo that. The United States has also wanted to undo any possibility that European countries can come together and form an economic unit stronger than the United States with more influence. So it's done everything it can to make the EU into a vassal apparatus and has succeeded largely. And it's not a new phenomenon. Certainly, this has been happening over years and years and years. But now we're seeing in a moment of crisis, in a moment where you have this earth-shattering conflict between Russia, Ukraine, where you have consequences that are so far reaching, and you have the European Union bowing down to the United States at every turn saying, yes, we will do whatever you want when it comes to Russia, economic warfare, whatever it is, we'll do it. And now we're seeing the consequences of what happens when a country is when the region, but the countries of Europe, the old empires, when they make themselves vassals of what is a collapsing empire. They're making themselves vassals of a collapsing empire. So here you go. I'm going to do an RT article, and maybe I will also review a Financial Times article if we have time, just to get the differing perspective. So here's what RT has to say. The dollar is stronger than the euro for the first time in 20 years. This was today. The U.S. currency traded above the euro on the Russian exchange. The euro fell below the US dollar on the Moscow exchange on Tuesday amid fears that the energy crisis will tip the European Union into recession. The dollar ruble rate stood at 58.70, while the euro decreased to 58.52 against the ruble as of 10:56 gram GMT. So that's incredible. And one of the ways that's incredible is not only because the euro has fallen, but what's happened to Russia. This is a really important point because the whole idea of this economic warfare was not, I repeat, it was not to necessarily create a situation where Europe is the principal loser. No, Europe is a loser as collateral damage. That's what the United States wanted. The United States wanted all the cake, right? That you have your cake, eat it too. It wanted all of it. It wanted Russia to suffer and it wanted Europe to suffer. It did not, I don't think, calculate for just Europe to suffer. But that's what's happening. So on the Moscow exchange, the euro is actually below the dollar. And that's because the ruble has not fallen in the ways that the United States hoped it would and that Europe hoped it would. Actually, the ruble has done better because Russia has paid specific attention to how to respond to the monetary crisis, the asset crisis, and the economic crisis that the United States was trying to impose onto Russia. So Russia has responded. Russia has used its resources, has sort of used its ability to navigate and reorient its economy so that the ruble remains stable. And with that stability has come the ruble doing better and better and better when pegged against the dollar or the euro. And that's what we're seeing here. So on the international exchanges, the euro edged closer to parity with the dollar. In a choppy forex trading, the European currency slid to just 1.0001 to the dollar, its lowest level in 20 years, meaning if you're paying euros, you're exchanging euros, all right? Maybe you're at the airport, maybe you're at a bank. You say, hey, I've got 50 euros, give me dollars. Well, you're going to get $50 in less than what? Less than a cent back, a fraction of a penny. The euro has fallen 12% against the greenback so far this year as a surge in energy prices in light of the conflict of Ukraine and sanctions against Russia, the continent's main energy supplier, has hurt European economies. For the first time in 20 years, parity has formed between the euro and the dollar as the U.S. currency continues to rise in anticipation of the tight monetary policy of the Federal Reserve. Yegor Zilnikov, chief analyst of the Economic Industry Analysis Department of Pромsvizbank told RBC Daily. We believe that until the ECB meeting on July 21st, the dynamics may continue and the dollar will become more expensive than the European currency, he explained. The growing anxiety over Russian gas supply has added to the pressure on the single currency. On Monday, Gazprom turned off the Nord Stream 1 pipeline that carries gas to the continent for annual summer maintenance. The repairs, which will last until July 21st, has been previously scheduled and agreed with all partners, according to the operator. Fears are rising that Russia may not switch the gas supply back on in 10 days when the works are over. Fiona Sincata, senior financial markets analyst at City Index, told The Guardian, this could cause a recession in Europe, she warned. So who holds the cards here, guys? Who won the war? It's obvious that Russia is not losing here, that Russia actually has a lot of leverage and it is using it as it should. I mean, Russia has been put into a corner. If you didn't believe Russia was in a corner when it announced its special military operation in late February, it's in a corner now, economically. All these sanctions. I mean, imagine Europe and the United States form what? A large section of the world economy as a whole. We're talking about upwards of 30, 40, 50% of the entire world economy. And you try to isolate it completely, Russia completely from it. What do you think Russia's going to do? What it has to do. And that's what's happening. And it's blowing back hard on Europe, especially. And that's what the United States likes to see. They like to see this. And so actually, my wife has a friend visiting right now who lives in France, and she's not aware of this. But I was talking to her about, hey, brace yourself for the recession to come, because it's coming, because that's what everyone is talking about. And it's going to hit Europe first because of the ways in which Europe and Russia are so integrated in terms of their energy supply system. And the United States is going to do everything it can to artificially stabilize, meaning just kind of pull the veil and wool over our eyes as an economic crisis happens. But we can expect that Europe will feel it first. And that's what all signs are pointing to. So I'm going to pull up actually a Financial Times article to see what they have to say about this as well. I like to read the Financial Times. Is this the right article? Oil? No, this might not be the right article. Sometimes it does this. There we go. Jeez. Sometimes Financial Times like goes to a different article when you click on the link in Google. It's weird. So here we go. It says euro approaches dollar parity and government bonds rally. Oil slides below $100 per day, $100 a barrel on recession fears. So continuing fears about the coming recession on Tuesday pushed oil prices lower, the euro towards parity with the US dollar, and government bonds higher. International oil benchmark Brent crude, which had climbed to almost $140 a barrel in early March as Western governments prepared sanctions against big producer Russia after its invasion of Ukraine, fell 7.1%, settling at $99.49 per barrel. U.S. marker West Texas Intermediate dropped 7.9% to settle at $95.84. The euro teetered on the edge of hitting $1 for the first time since 2002 as the dollar attracted safe haven buyers as well as traders taking advantage of the gap between interest rate expectations in the US compared with the Eurozone. The dollar index, which measures the greenback against 6 rival currencies and has a heavy euro weighting, was slightly higher on the day, up 0.1%, having earlier in the day hit its highest level since 2002. Investors have been spooked by business and consumer surveys that indicate a looming U.S. slowdown, with the central bank poised to aggressively raise interest rates this year to battle soaring inflations. Central banks are tightening interest rates into a slowdown, which is why commodity prices have turned, said Trevor Greetham, head of a multi-asset at Royal Asset Management. In a recession, he added, you would expect to see commodity prices crashing down, and we are in the early stages of that. Fears over the health of the economy are even more acute in Europe, where governments are worried about Moscow cutting off gas supplies, exacerbating an energy shock and cost of living crisis. Foreign exchange markets are discounting a severe European recession into the euro-dollar trade, Greg Anderson and Stephen Gallo of BMO Capital Markets wrote in a note to clients. This scenario has close links with energy supply constraints, they said, as well as winter or even summer fuel rationing. So you're going to get rationing. So that's what's going to happen in Europe. They're going to be rationing fuel, because they don't have any other option if Russia is not going to trade with them as a response to the sanctions. I mean, Russia can't really, but also Russia is saying, we're not going to just help you out when you're actually waging active economic warfare against us. On the other hand, the rising interest rates in the United States are meant to slow down production and really slow down consumption. That's how they're getting prices down, by actually hitting the demand side so that the supply side can rebound. And I mean, this is the criminality of capitalism, is that you have the state mediating, not in the interest of people, because higher interest rates doesn't mean people are happy. It just means that consumer prices will go down because corporations are like, oh, okay, all right, we can handle this now. We can handle this. We're going to get more money on the dollar. Our investments, the bankers, they're going to get more money on the dollar. That's what is kind of breeding more confidence, right, into these parasites. That's the criminality of capitalism. It's all about building the confidence of parasites. And so that's what's happening when it comes to these interest rates. And it would plunge the economy into a recession if they go on too long, because, well, it's interesting. You want to bring down consumer prices for the long term, But in the short term, what you're saying to people is, you know, you're not going to be able to invest. You're not going to be able to make the economy viable, which means if the economy is not moving in an investment sense, which in the United States, it's questionable if it ever does. There's not much investment beyond financial markets in the United States. But nonetheless, that kind of slowdown would mean that these corporations would say, okay, no investment. Okay, we're slowing investment. That means we're going to cut jobs. That means we're going to plunge workers into the recession. Job cuts, closures of production, etc. That's what recessions are, quote unquote. That's an economic crisis. So futures linked to TTF, the European wholesale gas price, were 7.6% higher at 175.5 euros per megawatt hour, more than double their level of early June. Analysts expect that the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates by as much as 0.75 percentage points at its July meeting, from a current range of 1.5% to 1.75%. Future markets point to a benchmark U.S. interest rate of 3.4% for early 2023. By comparison, futures tip the European Central Bank to tighten monetary policy more slowly, nudging its deposit rate from minus 0.5% to just 1% over the next month. The yield on Germany's 10-year Bund, a barometer for debt costs in the Eurozone, fell 0.11 percentage points to 1.13% as economic uncertainty drove demand for the low-risk asset. Bond yield prices fall as prices rise. U.S. government bond yields also fell, continuing to trade in a so-called inverted yield curve pattern that has historically predicted recessions. So the recession is coming. That's what they're telling us. We don't have to go into all this. This is all financial games. This is all just playing with your money, right? They're just playing with your money here. And the recession is coming and they're preparing for it. They're boosting the interest rate. They're slowing down the investment. And eventually that's going to mean layoffs. That's going to mean closures. That's going to mean trouble for the working class. I mean, it already means trouble for the working class because the working class is already in trouble. People are struggling. The inflation has done its damage. And this whole boom of so-called jobs has not been what Biden and the rest tell you it's been. They always say, oh, we've created all these jobs. And we know under Obama that 99% of those were low-wage jobs. Same goes for today. There are no high-paying jobs coming down the bend because there really is no investment. It's stagnant. And now they're going to roll it into the opposite, the other side of stagnation, which is contraction. And so contraction is coming. That is what capitalism does. And the euro going into parity with the dollar is just an indication of that. So it's bad, right? I think it was Lewis who asked, why is this bad? Well, it's bad because it's indicating that the recession is coming closer and closer. And it will probably hit Europe first because the Financial Times is right. There's other considerations here, right? The United States pumps its own disgusting fracked gas and oil, right? This disgusting practices, this destruction of the planet. The United States is going to pump more. Biden is on his way to Saudi Arabia to beg them also to flood the market, probably to try to bring prices down. So that's what's happening. The United States has more leverage in that way than Europe. Europe is a vassal at this point. Europe is doing whatever the United States wants it to do. And so that's what we're seeing with the euro. And this is big news, in my opinion, that the euro is in parity with the dollar now. And it's likely going to be declining below the dollar. And Moscow Stock Exchange already said that when the ruble is factored in, that yes, the euro is now below the US dollar in value. And so the United States is getting what it wants. And you see Germany, France, the UK, especially Germany, just walking in lockstep with the United States over this. I mean, shutting down Nord Stream 2, now these repairs on Nord Stream 1, the sanctions on Russia, all this energy crisis is very real for Europe. And it's going to be very difficult to imagine anything other than a rationing system in response to the bed that they've made. They've made their bed. Europe, this old colonial empire, has made its bed. It hasn't learned any lessons from being once the hegemon of global capitalism. It hasn't learned any lessons. The United States isn't teaching it any lessons. The United States is walking the EU like a bunch of dogs on a leash, and they're doing whatever the Biden administration says, even though the Biden administration has none of their interests at heart. The United States has been looking upon Europe as a potential site of further austerity and complete and total privatization since the EU formed. That's what the United States was hoping to get out of the EU. It was both worried about the EU and also it was hopeful about the EU, worried that global integration would undermine US hegemony, hopeful that global integration, that EU integration would provide an opportunity to cut Europe off in unison rather than one by one. And so that's what the United States is trying to achieve here. And the dollar raising or going above the euro's value is just one indication that if there's anything Biden has done successfully, it is turning Europe into a more compliant and obedient junior partner, puppet, poodle to the United States. That's the only success I can see out of the Biden administration so far. But the success, of course, is hollow because it only really reaches the top. It only reaches the rich. It only reaches the U.S. political class. That success is not enjoyed by the rest of the world because the rest of the world suffers when there is less integration, less cooperation, when there is a crisis, an economic crisis, which creates a scenario where the bankers and capital as a whole look to shed anything it can to recoup any kind of lost profit from a collapse. And that's what's coming. So we can expect layoffs, we can expect closures, we can expect consolidation, and we can expect contraction. That's what the Financial Times is warning about. That's what RT is warning about. They're essentially saying the same thing, just in different language, and it's a different perspective. So with that said, let's talk about Joe Biden now. Because I think, we could talk all day about the dollar. There's way more to talk about, right? When it comes to the dollar and the euro. Really what we're seeing is the decline of the euro and the dollar. We're seeing the decline of the old Western empires. There's a broader significance here. It's the end of Western civilization, quote unquote, because I don't like to use the word civilization when talking about the Western world, because it really has not been civilized at all. It's been completely and utterly characterized by barbarism. I mean, you could say, and I think it's true, that capitalism did bring with it some progress in certain areas, science, technology. That's surely true, but it's always off the backs of barbarism, off the back of brutal exploitation, colonialism, slavery, genocide, war, right? The exploitation of labor, on and on and on. Brutalization of women, brutalization of, of oppressed people of all kinds, right? That the war on socialism, all of it. I mean, all of this comes with that's the barbarism that any progress capitalism makes rides upon. So the fall of the dollar and the euro kind of tanking, all of this is an indication that the currency that is traded, that is used as exchange on the capitalist marketplace, is not only now a weapon of imperialism, but it's also a symbol of what is happening in the broader system, what is happening to the broader system of imperialism, which is decline, which is crisis, which is chaos, right? That's coming out tomorrow. I'm talking about Chaos and Black Agenda Report. That's what's happening with the dollar. It's like it's not a coincidence that all of these political leaders in Europe, the West and all the poodles of the United States and the United States itself are having a crisis of legitimacy politically, as the dollar and the euro struggle to maintain their own kind of legitimacy, as there's a fierce competition for the dollar to suppress the euro so it can remain strong in the face of all kinds of other weaknesses, right? So the political crisis, the economic crisis, the military crisis, right? Because the United States is not winning the Ukraine proxy war. It's not really winning anywhere. We can't really define what a victory. Sarah Flounders at the International Action Center calls it war without victory. Can't really define what victory means anymore under imperialism, right? Because destabilization, proxy wars, coups, outright military invasion, humanitarian interventionism, it's not yielding the same results. We're not seeing this progress the aims of imperialism, of hegemony. What it does is it makes a lot of profits for certain sections of capital, but the societies themselves are in decay. War is not helping that anymore. War brought industry, major industrial technology, major high technology to the United States. There was once a period where you could say, I mean, damn, the freaking internet, right? If it wasn't for the militarization of the United States, the rise of the military industrial complex, the internet wouldn't exist. I mean, the internet would eventually exist. All right. I'm not here fetishizing this. What I'm saying, though, is that that's how it happened. It happened through extreme militarization and the United States ascending into the top hegemon. That's how things like the internet happened. That's how high technology really happened. It came off the backs of the military state. So that's not happening anymore. We see stagnation economically. We see political crisis. We see recessions are becoming fewer and becoming more close, right? More frequent and closer together. If we do dip into a recession within the next year, we're talking about 2 in the matter of less than 5 years. 2 in less than 5 years. 3 in less than 15. 3 economic crises in less than 15 years. That kind of cuts in half what Karl Marx predicted, which is an economic bust cycle for capitalism happening every decade. About. Of course, it's always a variation, but about. That's the average. This system is way more unstable than it's ever been. So, talking about instability, let's actually talk about Joe Biden now. I'm going to pull it up. Joe Biden's recent polling numbers in the New York Times indicate trouble. Lots of trouble for Mr. Joe Biden. So here you go. Most Democrats want someone other than Biden to run for president in 2024, but still say he could beat Trump. Well, what the Democrats have had anti-Trump hysteria for how long now? I don't know what that number is supposed to mean anymore. What that factoid is supposed to really tell us. It doesn't tell us anything. Democrats have been told by their media that Trump is the number one enemy. So, of course, all Democrats are going to say that their party candidate, no matter how weak, is better and more suitable than Trump and that he would win. Of course they would. But just 26% of Democrats said they would prefer Joe Biden to be their party's candidate in 2024 in the election, and 64% want someone else heading the ticket. Biden's age and job performance were the top reasons cited by Democrats why they wanted a candidate other than Biden to be the nominee, which is the New York Times Siena College poll found. Just 13% of voters of all kinds say the United States is on the right track, while 77% said it was headed in the wrong direction. Biden would likely defeat former President Donald Trump again if the election were held today, the survey suggested, with 44% of voters selecting Biden compared to 41% for the Republican he beat in 2020. Now, I want to see that kind of summarized the numbers already. I want to see Because here we go. While finding it potentially very bad news for the 79-year-old incumbent's reelection hopes, the poll has even worse news for Biden when it comes to younger Democratic Party voters. So you heard the numbers before, right? The New York Times Siena poll says that just 26% of Democrats want Joe Biden to run in 2024 and 64% want a new ticket. Now, it's even worse. A whopping 94% of Democrats who are under 30. What the all right. A whopping 94%. Oh my God. They really don't want me to highlight this. A whopping 94% of Democrats who are less than 30 years old said they want someone besides Biden to be their nominee. I mean, think about that. That's pretty striking. That's everybody. There isn't a person under 30 that wants Joe Biden in the Democratic Party. They're not talking about independents. They're not talking about communists. They're not talking to me. I've never been asked to poll, mind you, ever. They're not talking to me. They're talking to loyal Democrats, people who sign up for the email list, who like campaign and do voter drives and all this shit, like stuff that I would never do for the Democrats. I would never do. But they are saying they don't want Biden under 30. Not surprising. Bernie Sanders was wildly more popular with this age group than anyone else. This is the age group, of course, that is more amenable to the word socialism. And Biden, what did he say about socialism? He said, go fuck your socialism, right? He said, screw your socialism. Capitalism's the best, blah, blah, blah. Joe Biden is no friend of socialists. So it says the president's age and job performance were the top reasons cited by Democratic respondents why they wanted a candidate other than Biden to be the party nominee. 33% cited Biden's age, while 32% cited displeasure with the work he has done in the White House, and just 13% of voters of all kinds say the United States is on the right track, while 77% said it was headed in the wrong direction. But there was one bright spot for Biden. So it's just talking about Donald Trump. Yes, he would beat Trump, supposedly. That's a very small margin, though, 44 to 41%, I must say. 44 to 41%, not the biggest margin, especially since you did beat the guy in 2020. So the thing about Democratic Party voters, especially Black Democratic Party voters, is if you've won, you're likely going to get support against the Republican. That's just a fact that has plagued, I guess you could say, but it's just a fact of political life that Democrats will always support, especially these loyalist kind of establishment Democrats will always support the candidate that has won and they think will win. I mean, it even happened to the Bernie folks. They didn't en masse stop voting. A lot of the Bernie supporters went out and voted for Joe Biden. You saw it all over the media too. Oh yeah, of course I voted for Joe Biden. I don't want to see Donald Trump, right? That they just did it. So why should I care about this? I don't care about what is there? I don't care about this number at all. I don't care about the Trump stuff. That's ridiculous. So this comes out amid a lot of things. So you can Gallup poll. That's what they talk. But I think the big takeaway here is one, nearly 2/3 of people don't want to see him on the ticket, right? His approval rating, I believe, is now 30. It's less than 30%. I mean, just 26% want him to run in 2024. His approval rating is 30%. And young people, over 90% of them don't want Biden. And then I think, I want to close this segment. I want to close just talking about this. 13% of voters of all kinds say the United States is on the right track, while 77% say it's heading in the wrong direction. So I want to talk about the factors for why that is. Well, first, let me show you a video that'll get you an idea for why people might think the country's heading in the wrong direction. And I'm going to mute my mic, so you guys just got to let me know if you hear it. I'm going to let you, this is just political optics, bad political optics. So here is Cashapp News, of course, Camila Escalante Ali Vargas, and others. You should follow them. They posted this, and I want to show you what Joe Biden said. So I'm going to mute my mic now, and let me know if you can hear it, okay? Because I don't want to put on headphones. So here we go.
Of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden.
The diversity of this community.
Of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden. Of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden.
The diversity of this community, as distinct as the Bogotas of the Bronx, as beautiful as the blossoms of Miami, and as unique as the breakfast tacos here in San Antonio.
Of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden.
So Joe Biden, who has a PhD, calls herself a doctor. Very nice, right? Very nice. Not elitist at all to do that. I have a lot of I know PhDs. There are many. I mean, if you're a PhD with any conscience, you're not calling yourself just like a doctor everywhere. That's what Joe Biden does. But there she goes, literally comparing the uniqueness and the diversity of Latinos and Latinx people, whatever, or however, whatever, wherever we want to call them. She said she compared them to the breakfast tacos in San Antonio. I didn't even catch the bodega thing, but I mean, it's just cringe. I mean, first of all, why are you talking about people like that? No one cares. No one cares about what you have to say. And the polls are showing they don't care. Like, none of this is working. The whole inclusion, diversity, the whole focus group, consultant driven, liberal, quote unquote, diversity initiatives, they don't work. And that language is all PR, and it doesn't really garner any more enthusiasm than what you had before. So not only are you oftentimes making cringe and insulting and casually racist comments, but then you're not even getting anything out of it. And this is what the Democratic Party is kind of all about right now. They'll do something cringe, they'll pander to multiculturalism and quote unquote diversity. They think they're being quote unquote woke by talking about the most narrow forms of racism, while they allow the institutional practices, the systemic roots of racism under capitalism to flourish. Jalen Walker can have bullets just absolutely, just obliterate and annihilate his body. But we'll celebrate Barack Obama, right? That's the politics of diversity. And under this bourgeois dictatorship, you have a lot of negative consequences, but it's blowing back hard because people don't really fall for it anymore. I remember in 2007, 8, I remember in 2008, 9, especially 9, 10, 11, 12, Obama's first term, it was real rough. It was real rough. The diversity politics, the way that Democrats talked about race and kind of put it in contradistinction to class, it made it very hard. And the blowback has been rough too, because there's been a lot of blowback of like class over race and not really a good conversation about, well, both are intertwined. Both represent a system of exploitation. Both work together. They operate together for a certain purpose, divide and conquer. We don't get that conversation, and it's the Democrats' fault. I mean, I can't sit here and say, oh, Republicans and your white identity politics, which is true, but oh, they're at fault. No, they've been telling us since they were all Democrats during the Dixiecrat days. They were telling us what they believed then, right? This is not something new for them. For the Democrats, this is something new. This is all a response to the movements that have occurred over the course of the last century, both domestically and abroad. It's all about virtue signaling for social control. That's what it's all about. And so it's not helping. The Biden administration is no more legitimate. It's not legitimate. All right. It's not getting any more popular. Why does almost 80% of people think the United States is going in the wrong direction? Well, people are suffering economically. Working people, working class people, getting poorer, have no prospects. People my age and younger are thinking to themselves, we're never going to retire. We're never going to have a home for ourselves. We're always going to be worried about the risk of homelessness, not having health care. We can't even have any leisure time because we're working so much. We have so much pressure to work, or go to school so we can work more and work more. We're in debt, medical debt, student debt, car payments that we can't pay, rent that we also can't pay. I mean, we're talking about suffering. And then the inflation has compounded onto that to just bury Joe Biden's favorability. It's buried it. It's plummeted, and now it is buried in the ground. It is in the ground. And I don't think it's going to come up anytime soon, barring some kind of monumental shift. Now, a midterm election may help a bit. Also, a recession that you recover from, and I put these fingers up very intentionally, a recession that you recover from, because this is what happened with Obama. Obama's popularity plummeted after 2012, and then he took credit for the recovery by the end of his administration and kind of saved his behind a little bit. So he was able to say, well, look, the median income has risen. Well, look, job numbers are up. Not taking into account all the casual workers, all the people that have been eliminated from the workforce, not taking into account the low wage nature of the jobs that were produced, right? So not taking out any of that, he took credit for a recovery that didn't exist. And then now you have Joe Biden, who's trying to position himself, I believe, in the same vein. So he's hoping to survive because nobody thinks that the economic situation is going in the right direction. Certainly, there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for what's going on with Russia, right? Not a lot of enthusiasm over this proxy war in Ukraine. I remember when it first started, there was a lot of fear. I was doing therapy, and some of my clients would be like, I'm scared of a nuclear war. I'm scared about what Russia is doing. I'm scared about Russia. They watch the news. They're scared about Russia. They're scared of Russia, whatever, irrational fears, but can't fault them for being propagandized. Now, they don't talk about it. No one talks about it. Why don't they talk about it? What is there to talk about? It just goes on and on and on and on and on. On and on and on. Right? It just keeps going. And the United States just keeps pumping weapons, sanctions, weapons. This is going to happen forever and ever and ever. That's what they say. That's what Biden is saying. They're not talking diplomacy. And then you have some people saying, well, it can't go on forever, guys. You have some of these insiders saying that. But nonetheless, what we're really speaking about is that domestic policy, foreign policy, economic policy, at all levels, dissatisfaction reigns. What is there to be enthusiastic about? Cops kill Jalen Walker. Cops kill black people nearly once per day. Cops kill people nearly 3 times per day each year for about over 1,000 people. Mass incarceration is no better. No student debt relief. No Medicare for all. No nothing. No Build Back Better infrastructure deal, right? No jobs that can pay a living wage. No relief during COVID-19 for your rent, for anything else. Nothing. No real commitments to climate change other than talk, right? No massive investment in a Green New Deal to get us to work on saving the planet. Nothing for indigenous people. Nothing for the undocumented who continue in record rates to be detained, imprisoned, beaten, deported. Nothing for them, right? Just nothing. Just more and more propaganda. And I mean, one of the unprecedented things about Biden, and I'll close up this segment with this, is that one of the interesting things about Joe Biden is he can't get away with it. That he's one very cognitively impaired, and people see it, which is why in those polling numbers, even though it wasn't the only thing, and it was very close to in terms of percentage over dissatisfaction with just the performance, right? His age, and it was up there, and I don't think it's because of some discrimination about aging. I think people see his struggles when he speaks, and I mean, you see it even. I watch sports. I even see it in like there are sports impressions. A guy I love to follow, Josh Rosen, because he does impressions of one of my uh, uh, one of the Skip Bayless, who I watch Undisputed. I watch those shows. He does great impressions, but he also does a Joe Biden impression. The way he does it, some people, I see the thread. People see this stuff and they're like, "Wow, you are way." They're like, "A good impression, but too intact," right? People see this and they're like, this guy Joe Biden is not all there. He is declining. And people don't like that. So there's all sorts of reasons to have a crisis of confidence right now for Joe Biden's administration, both materially, policy-wise, and in just the optics of it all. The optics of it all. So Joe Biden is in big trouble. And some people are floating out, maybe he'll be impeached. Maybe there will be a scandal that will get him to that level, right? It's not like his son doesn't have a whole lot of scandals. But it's more likely that he just flails in the wind until 2024 when there's a real decision made. I do believe the Democratic Party will make a decision. They're either going to do round the clock work to revitalize Biden's image for 2024. It might depend on 2022. It might depend on the results. Either go all in with Biden or get rid of the guy. Kick him to the can. All right, Joe, that was nice. We chose you because, well, we could trust you to serve the elite, to serve big capital, to serve the military industrial complex and Wall Street with all of your loyalty. But you just can't do the job anymore. So let's go to the next person. Who is the next in line? I don't think there is one. I don't think there is a plan for anybody. But who's next in line that we can tolerate? Because at this point, there aren't many candidates that are acceptable to the Democratic Party, which we could say, well, by far and away, they're better optics-wise than Joe Biden. I mean, Pete Buttigieg, this guy is a walking PR nightmare. From his military days to everything he's said, he is a nightmare. He is a nightmare PR-wise. He's not popular. Black people do not like Pete Buttigieg. There ain't nothing to like about him. Every time he got on camera around black people, he said something stupid. So this is something that we have to pay attention to. And Joe Biden's administration is in trouble. Europe is in trouble. All of this speaks to trouble. Trouble. But with that said, I mean, the responsibility for us is to understand why, and then to educate others as to why, and why it means we need to move in the direction of building up people power, building up the power of the people to fight for socialism, building up their capacities to fight for real socialism, for actual power, right? To begin thinking about, well, people like Joe Biden, people like Chuck Schumer, people like Nancy Pelosi, people like AOC, people like Bernie Sanders, all of them can't make decisions for us anymore. We need a new party, a new vehicle. We need to think about what does it look like for us to have the power to get what we want. And that will guide our political process for doing just that. So now I don't think I'm going to go over the Xinjiang stuff. That's a lot of stories for today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the article I published on Substack, and I'm going to link it to you all now in the chat. Yes, I will put it in the description afterward. But go to the chat right now, and I want to know what you guys think of this. The link is there. So go to the chat, click the link. You can read along with me. I'm going to put it up on the screen. What did you think of this? This is something I wrote yesterday, and I was kind of proud of it. Maybe I'll find some errors because I did a fast edit. But it's something I want to try out because I think it's relevant. It's the ghost stories of capitalism. We're talking, people have lost so much. That's something I've been thinking about a lot because I feel like, my life, I feel I am appreciative for a lot of things in my life. But I also acknowledge that I've lost a lot of things. Even in just the last 5 years, I've lost a lot. And all of us have lost a lot in the last few years alone. So we got to talk about this because the despair, and I talk about this in the article, I'm going to get to it. Despair is a tricky thing. Despair can be manipulated. Despair can direct us in places we may not want to go. This goes for politics. So while you're waiting for me to pull this up, continue to like the stream. Let me check out. Maybe I will. Yeah, let me check out what the ratio is. So, like the stream. Yeah, okay. So now I have more likes than viewers. That's great. So share this around. So, of course, continue to like the stream. Share the stream if you can. Subscribe to the channel, of course. Hit that notifications bell. And the best way to support me is patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. I'm still trying to I think I'm going to try to get to 500 subscribers because that's the way, it's about 25 away. That's the way I can kind of withstand the mass exodus that happens at the end of every month. So I can keep at my goal. So patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. And here you go. Here's the article. All right. So let's see if I can get, okay, so I can get bigger. So the ghost stories of capitalism, watching the shutters of austerity close. So I'm talking about my time at a war on poverty program, which provided an inside look into the ravages of neoliberal capitalism that continue to devastate the poor and working class. All right, and here's a nice photo of a welfare rights march in 1968. All right. So I said in 2013, I was a recent college graduate looking for my first quote unquote real job as an adult. I had majored in social work and my $25,000 worth in student loans were quickly coming due. After 3 months in an AmeriCorps program where I made less than minimum wage, I landed a caseworker job at the Tri-City Community Action Program in the Boston area city of Malden. It was a union job, but only paid $28,000 per year or less than $14 an hour. Like most in my generation, I was still living with my family at the time and took the job since it paid nearly double what I was making at my prior gig. So I want to just let you know about this context. I was at an AmeriCorps program. It was paying me $15,000 flat. That was paid in like the stipend bi-monthly. It was absolutely criminal. I couldn't stand it. It was called Lyft Communities. And this agency, I kid you not, I've written about this years ago, was funded by all of the big banks, the big financial institutions that got us into the crisis. And they used primarily volunteer students to do their work, meaning that I was being paid by AmeriCorps. So Lyft wasn't fitting the bill for that. And the students were free. So this was like slave labor, but in the volunteer. This was slave labor, but just volunteer on a volunteer basis. Oh, and you're doing good. You're helping poor people. It was like case management. So people who met certain income guidelines could come in and get help navigating resources. And I remember from day one, I took it because I needed something. It was hard to find something as I came to graduation. And so I took it because I was like, all right, I need to make some money. And immediately I was like, this is a privatization sweatshop. So I left 3 months and I found this job at TriCap. And there were qualities about this job at TriCap that I was excited about. I had interviewed for union staff organizing positions, but decided the lifestyle of grueling travel was not for me. TriCap would allow me to dive into class struggle as a rank and file worker, and I quickly assumed shop steward duties for a small shop of 5. I would also be working directly in the community, serving the exploding homeless population in the area following the 2007-2008 economic crisis. The agency served as a hub for working class people and the economically insecure to navigate their basic needs for housing, food, legal aid, and a host of social services. People who slept on the street, in shelter, or in couch surfed apartments with friends would come in droves for a safe place to just be during work hours. That was one of my favorite parts of the job. I would spend like 30, 40 minutes at minimum per day, just triaging in the lobby, hanging out, joking with. We had some characters. It was all like what they call in the UK rough sleepers, people who sleep out in the streets. They would just come, hang out. Sometimes they would be they would be drinking. I'd be like, oh my God. Always have to tell them, please don't do that in public, like in here while you're awake. Because, there were a lot of people coming. I'd be like, please, if you're going to drink, we weren't trying to stop them. That wasn't our philosophy. We couldn't say, stop drinking right now, punish you. We just like, don't do that while here. I had one severe, one really mentally ill client who I'm going to talk about a little bit. She had definitely psychosis, schizophrenia, like deep, so bad that it was hard to understand. She spoke in like magical thinking. And I remember she would do this thing where she would have a red cup. She'd be like, it's water. And then, I'd be at the desk, the front desk, sometimes answering phones and whatnot. And she would take her vodka, like she would have a flask and she would just pour it in. And I'd be like, stop that. Like, so we would have some good times. So TriCap was a second generation war on poverty program that was birthed in 1978. The war on poverty began in 1964 during the presidential administration of Lyndon Johnson. At the time, Johnson was faced with a problem. Urban rebellions led by mainly black youth were sweeping the United States. The New Deal had failed to eliminate poverty and actually facilitated a growing divide between unionized workers and what some called the quote-unquote underclass, an extremely poor and mainly unemployed section of the working class, which was disproportionately represented in black communities. Johnson said himself that the modest funding for anti-poverty programs was meant to, quote, turn tax eaters into taxpayers, end quote. So you see, Lyndon Johnson wasn't really in it for the poverty. He wasn't very benevolent himself. He was doing this for political reasons. He wanted the chaos to stop on the streets. He wanted the rebellion to stop. That's when the ruling class does anything. They want the rebellion to stop. So if you can become a taxpayer, meaning you don't make much money, but at the very least you're not completely and utterly economically insecure, then that's good enough for Lyndon Johnson. But community action programs, or CAP programs, emerged out of the war on poverty and received modest grants from a range of federal agencies to keep their doors open. Community members and volunteers staffed the services. So you may not know this, but Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton worked at a CAP agency during the initial phase of the Black Panther Party. These programs complemented the newly institutionalized food stamp, Medicare, and Medicaid programs and formed the rudiments of a social safety net. However, CAP agencies suffered from chronic underfunding from the outset. By the end of the 1970s, U.S. capitalism entered its neoliberal phase, where austerity and privatization reigned supreme. Federal agencies such as the Department of Housing and Urban Development were reduced to near non-existence. Welfare was eradicated altogether in 1996, and tens of thousands of public housing units were demolished or privatized under the Bill Clinton administration. That was Hope. I always get this wrong. Hope 6, I believe it was. I always say Hope 4 or Hope 6. It wasn't very hopeful, though. So CAP agencies either shut their doors permanently or offered only the services that were supported by a mixture of private philanthropy and meager government subsidy. It was out of this environment that TriCap formed to address the growing poverty problem of extreme poverty, addiction, and homelessness in the cities of Everett, Malden, and Medford. By the time I arrived as a caseworker in the fall of 2013, TRICAP had already experienced years of shrinking state and federal funds. It attempted to make up for the shortage by finding alternative funding sources for programs such as Head Start. Finances became more complicated, and there was insufficient staff to manage them. This was a kind of internal agency secret, quote unquote, that was subject to much water cooler talk. Fear of layoffs or even closure grew as I entered union negotiations in the summer of 2014. So, yeah, this was talked about all the time. I mean, when you looked at the place, I was like, this place is old. It's like, it had the feel that I liked. It had a very community feel. It looked like it hadn't been renovated in years and years and years. It was kind of dark. But I liked the feel. I liked my little team. I had a little team of just another coworker of mine and another caseworker and then my supervisor. So, and we had a very small it was a very small group of people who worked on my floor. It was the mobile homeless outreach team and the legal aid team, and there was one caseworker for like HIV work. It was very small. And then there was the program director who was above my supervisor, who was hired later. So it was good. It was interesting, but it was I mean, what I talk about here is I say Head Start. I mean, that program has been chronically underfunded everywhere. And in this context alone, we're talking about more than $500,000 shortfall over a period of time before I got there. And this agency, which I'll let you know one thing they did, they had one comptroller. This wasn't like an HR department. They really didn't have an HR department, which I really liked. It was just like a handful with one person responsible for the finances, handful of people responsible for the administrative work, but they didn't call themselves HR. You didn't go to anyone in particular to disputes and all. They didn't have like an HR rep during negotiations or anything like that. It was much looser than that. And I really liked that, actually. It made things a lot easier from the standpoint of advocating for you. But with that came some problems because, as I said here, there were a lot of problems with one person managing. She got sick. It was sad. She got sick. She was out for months and things got out of hand. They were already bad, but they got out of hand. So an ominous sign came when I was told by the executive director during a negotiations meeting that our raises would need to be slashed from a paltry 3% per year to 1% due to a funding shortfall. Of course, I didn't believe him and asked the agency to open the books because I had no idea about all these problems that they were happening. I found that out later. Financial records revealed that the agency was indeed in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. I believe it was somewhere like $500,000. I wanted to make this a community issue and broaden the struggle, but my UAW, I was in the United Auto Workers, a local business agent, tapped out, said, no, we're not going to support that. We settled for a one-year contract that promised a raise of 1.5% with everything else remaining the same in the contract. So I felt like I had lost. I mean, this was my first real union negotiations, first time in a union. I was excited. I was trying to organize. I got like my coworker who lost her son to an overdose, who was struggling to pay the bills. I got her to come to negotiations and talk about it. It was really hard for her, to talk about that experience. She had been there for years and years. I had to work with my supervisor who was very, very resentful that we were trying to get more money while we were already being paid very close to the rate that she was. Actually, my coworker who had been there for longer because of seniority and the raises had actually surpassed my supervisor, and she was resentful for that. And so she was resentful that we were calling for more. We were saying no, our raises are too low. 3% is considered now standard, but it's low. Nonetheless, though, little did I know that this feeling of loss that I had, we had settled for a bad contract, a 1 year. Got to go back to the table. We didn't get anything but a reduction in our raises. So Little did I know that the sour feeling of loss that I experienced during negotiations would only grow larger in the months to come. The mobile homeless outreach team was liquidated and I was laid off in December of 2014. TRICAP closed its doors entirely just days later. The feeling was surreal. Hundreds of people sleeping outside on the streets of the community were suddenly without a key lifeline. So what we did, I mean, I helped people with housing search, yes, filled out a lot of applications for people, but we had emergency food services, emergency clothing services. We help people, direct people to the shelters, to the meals, everything that they needed while they were in this crisis of homelessness, we try to provide. And that was gone. I like literally did so. I mean, I'm going to tell you. So I said goodbye to my most high needs clients and attempted to connect them to services that could help continue to the work that I would be unable to finish. One of my clients who slept outside, even in the harshest of weather, and suffered from severe alcohol use disorder, had just been diagnosed with an esophageal mass, a fancy word for cancer. Oh, I got an error here. He cried in my cubicle when he was diagnosed. All I could do was connect him to a local hospital organization director who promised to follow his situation once we closed. And I still think about him to this day. I still do. I'm like, what happened to him? Some people who I don't believe, because I did end up in the area a few times since I left there, said that he died. Other people said that's not true. But nonetheless, I still think about what happened to him because I worked with him. He slept on the streets. I talked to him. I saw him every day, 5 days a week for like a year. You know what I'm saying? Like for more than a year. So in my short 14 months, a lot happened at TRICAP. The staff was entirely working class and most resided in the or grew up in the community. Due to the precarity of the work, it was not uncommon for staff to have the very problems that we attempted to address for our clients. I bore witness to my coworker losing her son to overdose. I watched my supervisor get racially profiled by cops within the agency's four walls. So they literally came and ID'd her. They wanted to take her away. So one thing about a couple of experiences I had was that, which was ridiculous. She was so pissed, and we were all there with her, but this is someone who literally lived in Malden. So the cops, the Malden police were like, give us your ID because they were searching out. They did this all the time. They were really like immigrant hunters. I remember going to the department, the DTA, the Department of Transitional Assistance, which did the food stamp applications, so-called welfare applications, TANF, not really welfare anymore. I went there once with a client, and Department of Homeland Security had 2 militarized guards. I'm talking about this room could have been no more than 350, maybe 500 square feet. Chairs waiting to a door that would take you to your caseworker behind the wall. And I kid you not, they had 2 heavily militarized guards armed with what looked like AK-40 AR-15s maybe, watching and waiting for someone to reveal their documentation status, their citizenship status. I kid you not, that was the experience I had there. So there's just so many stories just in this line of work. So many of our clients would injure themselves on the premises. I had many people get so intoxicated, they fall, hit their head, that kind of thing. And then we would scramble because we knew the police harassed our clients. They harassed them. So we were like, no, we don't want the cops there. Well, we would do anything we could, call different numbers to the EMS, literally request, hey, could you not bring the cops over here? They're often making things a lot more difficult. We would do things like that. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. One night on a drunken, fun night with colleagues, coworkers, we confronted the police chief in Malden, who we caught harassing one of our most mentally ill clients. The woman I was talking about, she schizophrenia, psychosis of some kind. Had to confront him because he was literally harassing her, trying to move her into a shelter. She did not want to go. She said no. She did unfortunately have an open can of alcohol. And so while some of us confronted him, we went to her and was like, hey, you might just want to put that away for now so they can't have any excuse to take you in. It was absolutely ridiculous. So the next month after TriCap closed was the hardest of my life. I was thrusted into unemployment, even though I secured a job at a day shelter in the heart of downtown Boston that would start within a month. So I wouldn't start until after the new year, give me a couple of weeks, ample time with my thoughts. Insomnia, irritability, sadness, anger, and depression tormented the open space that I had between the jobs. Never before had I experienced the external pressure of neoliberal capitalism so directly. But there was little time to digest the experience. Rent was due. So I've thought about this experience periodically ever since. Sometimes the experience comes to mind when a memory just rushes back seemingly out of nowhere. Other times my TriCap experience resurfaces out of reflection of my own personal experience. It is an understatement to conclude that this experience hardened me. Despite already self-identifying as a communist upon entering TriCap, I learned firsthand how quickly and easily the U.S. capitalist regime can take away vital services for the poor, while Democrats and Republicans alike siphon trillions into bank bailouts, endless wars abroad, and mass incarceration. And we were all powerless at this time as workers and oppressed people to stop it. Despair is a normal reaction to the disparities and crimes of the U.S. capitalist system in its cruel empire. After all, half the population is in or at risk of poverty and the toxic stress that comes with it. But taken too far, despair can paralyze people into seeking individual solutions to collective problems of class exploitation. Working class poor and oppressed people need a vehicle that develops their power and capacity to confront exploitation collectively and educate them toward an understanding of the system of capitalism and imperialism that drives it. Barack Obama and now Joe Biden are teaching us that the Democratic Party is no such vehicle. So I end by saying the TriCap experience taught me that it is power, not reform, which is needed most in this moment of system crisis. In order to get power, we will need to develop an alternative to the establishment parties that is willing and ready to prepare for revolution. So that's it. That's the article. I'm going to put it here again. So subscribe to my Substack. You can do paid there. I like paid subscriptions there. I advocate it. It's a good way of supporting this work as an alternative to Patreon as well. So, that's my article. I will link it in the description after this. I got to edit it a little bit. There were some minor errors. I'm picky about that stuff. I know a lot of people publish articles with some errors. I hate them though. I learned that from Glenn Ford. Oof, just like any little thing is just like, So with that said though, that's the article. This was an experience, and I have about 5 or 10 more minutes before I got to head out. This was an experience for me that was traumatic. That whole period was fucking traumatic. I mean, yeah, the pandemic has been traumatic and maybe to a level beyond, definitely. But I'm talking about at the same time I started working here, there was a massive closure of one of the biggest homeless shelters in Boston called Long Island Shelter. All the beds closed, and I had to deal with the consequences at the next job more so. But they literally took all of the people sleeping. I think it was 400, 500 beds. All the people sleeping in this shelter, made them cross this bridge, the Long Island Bridge, because it was literally an island that connected to the city. Cross the bridge in the fucking cold. This was right around before I left. This was in the fall. Forced people to fucking take that shit, and there was no alternative beds. So I had to deal with that in the day shelter because our day shelter was turned into a makeshift shelter, as a lot of places were. Never made up for it, and it was never replaced. And so just a lot of stuff like that just happened, watching my colleague suffer from losing her son. He was a client and he was her son, and he died. He overdosed. There's so much of that, so much overdosing. Our bathroom had a place where people could put their needles because we couldn't stop them. First of all, we were a harm reduction model, but we couldn't stop them from using on our premises. So we were like, well, make sure things are safe, make sure people are, if they're going to use, which we highly discourage, and we tried to monitor so we could catch anything. The tough thing is we weren't trained in Narcan at the time, and that was hard because, man, sometimes people would be in that bathroom and wouldn't come out, and we would have to bust in and call ambulances. It was an experience. It was one of the best experiences I've had working, though, because one, I got to see what the situation of unions was like directly from an internal perspective. Not good. It wasn't the best experience, I would say. And then I also got to, um, really learn about the precariousness of this so-called profession that I was in. And that hasn't really changed. I've had better jobs since then, thankfully. But still, this work is very precarious. And you could say that if you called social workers, quote unquote, professional managerial class, because they're the most proletarianized of the bunch by far. Nurses, teachers, they all, in terms of materially, do better. But most of these professions are still very proletarianized, whether it's in their monetary compensation and just compensation in general, or whether it's just the overwork, which is a form of exploitation. So we have to understand that working hours, more hours, more hours, more hours, that's a form of exploitation. It happens all the time in these professions, all the time, these so-called professional managerial class professions. I always have a problem also with the term professional managerial class. Maybe I should do a whole video on this, because teachers and nurses and social workers generally manage 0 people. So I always love the managerial part to be eliminated for a subsection, because there's no managing anything. You could say we're managing the upkeep of the system. Sure. But every worker does that to some degree. And you could say we're detached from production. Sure. But American capitalism, imperialism is generally detaches most workers from production at this point. So what's the utility of this? Well, we do need to label and understand professionals differently. But I learned that most jobs from the very outset, they're shit jobs. And this was one of them. Luckily, it had other aspects of it, the community aspect, the class struggle aspect, that I really got a lot from, and I learned a whole lot from. And I've taken that with me ever since. But emotionally, it was hard. It was traumatic. And this is, when I say ghost story, I mean that this agency literally closed. We were working with hundreds of people, dozens of which we built extremely close connections with. Some of them life or death connection. There's some of our clients who were like, if they didn't have our place to go, their likelihood of death would increase. Literally, this is not hyperbole. They would not feel comfortable going other places. Most places don't like, quote unquote, rough sleepers. They would be out in the cold and they would die. And people do die all the time from just being out in the cold. So just remember that. And that's what I wanted to talk about in the article, is just my personal experience. This is a ghost story. Austerity closed the shutters on this agency, right? This agency was literally relying on bank loans to remain on the property, a defaulted bank loan. I mean, this is the utter precariousness, the utter ridiculousness. It's so infuriating, right? To think that this agency that has a thread of a budget. I think our budget was somewhere like $3 million for everything, staff, services, everything. That's not a lot of money for everything, for the property. We're talking about all the costs together, less than just a couple $1 million. And the government doesn't want to shell out anything. They throw a couple $1 million for a drone, for an unmanned aerial drone, like it's hotcakes, like it's nothing. But to provide soup, a warm place to go during the coldest and most inclement of weather, to provide an MTA card, a train card, so they can get to the shelter, to get them to search for housing for them, help them get employment. No, can't shell that out. We can cut your child. Head Start is a program for children. It's a program for working class people to bring their children to so they can get an early education. It's kind of like daycare, really. But, there's all this research about how Head Start actually helps bridge the gap, the education gap, achievement gap, as they call it. But really, it's daycare. And that's reminding me I got to go to an appointment at 6:00. But that is, yeah, that is what capitalism is all about. So I hope that some of these personal experiences can illuminate that, because it's where I come from. It's how I got to where I am. It drove me. I was already passionate. I mean, I tell you, on my downtime at this job, I was reading, studying. I was reading articles. I was reading Marxism. I was reading all kinds of stuff on foreign policy. That's what I was doing. I feel like that period, I probably was doing the most political education for myself. And I felt like I needed that because I was so embedded in the day-to-day suffering. And it's an experience I'll never forget. And it's one that I think about still. So with that said, though, I got 10 minutes until this appointment. I mean, it's a work from home appointment, but I got 10 minutes. I got to feed my dog. I love all of you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to that Substack. I love when more people subscribe to the Substack. But the best way to support, I still have about, I want to get to 500 subscribers to help buffer. I reached the goal and it's great. And there's still so many days left of July. But if I get to 500 subscribers, I can kind of mitigate what will be the end of the month exodus for people. A recession is coming. So while that really contradicts a request to support and sustain this work, I will say, if you can, please do at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. Before you leave here, like the stream. It'll be available to you after I'm gone. Hit the subscription button, hit that notifications bell, all that good stuff. I'm going to see if I can get on here with Margaret tomorrow. I got to reach out to her. I'm going to try to get on with her probably earlier in the day than today. But that's something that I want to try to plan with her. And yeah. So after that, probably not till Saturday. Might have some time Saturday night, but I got some other things I got to do. So keep on the lookout. I got to fix up this article a little bit, go to this appointment. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. Peace out. Take care.